My son's message arrived while I was polishing the silver picture frames in his old bedroom. Cancel your trip to Hawaii, Mom. Sarah thinks 3 people will ruin our romantic getaway. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my reflection multiplying endlessly in the silver surfaces around me. That text would soon cost Michael more than he ever imagined possible. If you are watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I am Eleanor Martinez, 62 years old, and until that Wednesday morning, I believed I understood my place in my son's life perfectly. I had raised Michael alone after his father walked out when he was 8 years old. For 26 years, it had been just the 2 of us navigating life together. Or so I thought. The Hawaii invitation had arrived a month earlier, delivered with Michael's signature enthusiasm. Mom, Sarah and I want you to join us for 2 weeks in Maui this winter. Our treat. He had written on expensive stationery with little palm trees decorating the borders. My heart had soared with joy at the thought of finally bonding with Sarah, who had seemed pleasant but distant during their 3-year relationship. I had immediately begun planning for the trip of a lifetime. $850 spent on resort-appropriate clothing, my first passport application in decades, and even a consultation with a travel agent about island activities. The anticipation had consumed my thoughts for weeks as I imagined long walks on the beach with Michael, getting to know Sarah better, and creating memories that would last forever. Standing in Michael's childhood bedroom, surrounded by his baseball trophies and graduation photos, I reread the message that shattered everything. The cruelty was not just in the words themselves, but in the casual way he had dismissed me. The trip was in 2 weeks. My suitcases were already packed and waiting by the front door. My neighbor Mrs. Chan had agreed to watch my house and water my plants for the entire duration. I walked to the window that overlooked the small garden where Michael had played as a child. The wooden playhouse I had built for his 10th birthday still stood in the corner, weathered but sturdy. He had spent countless hours in that little house, planning elaborate adventures and telling me about his dreams of becoming a veterinarian and helping animals all over the world. Now he was building a life that apparently had no room for the woman who had sacrificed everything to support those dreams, who had worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for his college, who had never missed a single baseball game or graduation ceremony, who had celebrated every achievement as if it were my own. My hands remained steady as I picked up my phone to reply. I was not crying, though perhaps I should have been. Instead, something cold and determined had settled in my chest, something that felt strangely like clarity. Because Michael had finally shown me exactly where I stood in his priorities. And I was about to show him exactly what that revelation would cost him. The deed to the downtown apartment was locked in my bedroom safe. The luxury 2-bedroom condominium I had purchased for Michael as a college graduation gift. The apartment he believed he owned free and clear, but which remained legally in my name for tax purposes. Legal ownership and assumed ownership are very different things, and Michael was about to learn that distinction the hard way. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with documents spread before me like tarot cards revealing an uncomfortable future. The apartment deed showed my name as sole owner, exactly as I had planned when I had given Michael what he thought was his independence. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I dialed his number. Michael answered on the second ring, his voice bright with the artificial cheerfulness he used when he felt guilty about something. "Mom, I got your voicemail. Look, I know you might be a little disappointed about Hawaii, but Sarah really thinks it would be better if we had some alone time to plan our future together." "Michael," I interrupted, keeping my voice level and controlled. "We need to discuss the apartment on 5th Street. There was a pause, the kind of silence that stretches when someone is trying to process unexpected information. "What about it, Mom?" "That is my apartment. You gave it to me when I graduated college. I let you live in it," I corrected gently. There is a significant difference between those 2 things. The silence that followed was more profound this time. I could hear Sarah in the background asking what was wrong, her voice carrying that particular tone people use when they sense relationship drama approaching. "Michael, I'm going to email you some legal documents to review. We can discuss them when you return from your Hawaiian vacation." "Mom, what legal documents? You're starting to scare me now." Have a wonderful time in Maui, sweetheart. Do not worry about me. I will be perfectly fine managing on my own. After ending the call, I opened my laptop and began researching something I had been putting off for years. Travel opportunities for independent women over 60. David had always promised we would see the world together before his heart attack stole that dream away. Now I was finally ready to make those plans a reality, with or without his memory as my guide. The irony was exquisite. Michael was taking his girlfriend on a romantic vacation while excluding his mother, never knowing that his mother was about to embark on adventures that would make their Hawaii trip look like a weekend at a roadside motel. Unlike their vacation, mine would not have a predetermined return date. I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine I had been saving for Michael's next promotion. Apparently, legal independence qualified as a celebration worthy of my best vintage. Outside my kitchen window, sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and somewhere across town, Michael was probably trying to explain to Sarah why his mother had suddenly developed an interest in property law. By morning, I would own one fewer apartment and possess unlimited freedom to discover who Eleanor Martinez could become when she stopped defining herself through her son's needs. The question was not whether I could follow through with this decision. The question was whether I finally had the courage to become the woman David had always believed I could be. Friday arrived with paperwork from my attorney's office, and a sense of liberation I had not experienced in decades. Every document had been prepared with meticulous attention to detail, every signature properly notarized, every legal requirement satisfied completely. The Fifth Street apartment was now officially on the market, with all proceeds to be held in escrow until Michael returned from his Hawaiian adventure. I stood on my front porch drinking morning coffee and watching the for sale sign being installed in front of Michael's building through my binoculars. The real estate agent, Robert Harrison, had assured me that luxury apartments in that neighborhood moved quickly in the current market. 2-bedroom units with those amenities, Mrs. Martinez. We will have multiple offers before the weekend ends. My phone had been ringing constantly since yesterday evening. Michael calling from the airport departure gate, then from their hotel in Honolulu. Sarah's number appearing repeatedly on my caller ID, though she had never called me directly in the 3 years I had known her. Every call went straight to voicemail, creating a digital record of their growing panic. Mom, Robert Harrison called saying my apartment is for sale. This has to be some kind of terrible mistake. Then, Mom, please call me back immediately. Sarah is saying we should fly home early. And finally, this morning from Paradise, we are cutting our vacation short. Cancel whatever you think you are doing right now. But I was not canceling anything. If anything, I was accelerating my timeline. My attorney had arrived at 11 with final documentation and a bottle of champagne to commemorate what she called the most elegant response to disrespect she had witnessed in 30 years of practice. It is not about revenge, I explained to her as we reviewed the trust documents in my living room. This is about natural consequences. Michael made a choice when he sent that text message. He chose to treat his mother like an inconvenience rather than a blessing. I am simply responding to his choice with one of my own. We carefully reviewed the financial calculations. Every payment Michael and Sarah had made toward apartment expenses over 3 years, including utilities, improvements, and maintenance costs, would be calculated and returned to them. I was not stealing anything from them. I was reclaiming what had always been mine while ensuring they were not financially devastated by my decision. Where will you go now? My attorney asked with genuine curiosity. I showed her the travel brochures I had collected over the past 2 days. I'm thinking Australia first. David always said the Great Barrier Reef was the most beautiful ecosystem on Earth. Then maybe New Zealand, Thailand, wherever my curiosity leads me next. And if Michael wants to reconcile when he returns, I considered this possibility carefully. He will have to demonstrate that he has learned something valuable about respect, gratitude, and the difference between having a mother and deserving one. Those lessons cannot be taught through words alone. After my attorney left, I began the process of packing for an indefinite journey. Not everything I owned, just enough for extended travel with an uncertain destination. Clothes that made me feel confident and comfortable, books I had been meaning to read for years, photographs of David and happier times with Michael before he began taking my presence for granted. The house felt different already, as if removing the burden of unappreciated sacrifice had somehow expanded the space itself. For 3 years, I had been living as though I were shrinking, making myself smaller and quieter to fit into Michael and Sarah's vision of what a mother should be. Grateful for whatever attention they offered, never demanding more consideration than they felt like giving. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten something crucial about my own identity. I had forgotten that I was Eleanor Martinez, the woman who had raised a son single-handedly while working full-time as a registered nurse, who had put herself through graduate school while managing a household, who had loved deeply and been loved by a wonderful man before fate intervened. I had allowed myself to become just Michael's mom instead of remembering that I was also David's widow, a trusted friend to many, and most importantly, my own complete person with dreams and desires that existed independently of my son's needs. Saturday brought sunshine and the first serious offer on Michael's apartment. Robert Harrison called at 9 in the morning with news that would change everything permanently. Eleanor, we have 4 offers, all above the asking price. One buyer wants to close within a week. Cash purchase, no financing contingencies. I sat in my garden drinking fresh coffee and watching butterflies visit the flowers I had planted in David's memory. The timing felt like a sign from the universe that I was finally making decisions aligned with my authentic self. Accept the highest offer, Robert. And yes, 1 week is perfect for closing. Michael and Sarah's flight would land tomorrow evening. They would return from paradise to find strangers measuring their former apartment for new furniture, and a sold sticker covering the for sale sign. The timing was so perfect it felt like divine intervention finally answering prayers I had been too afraid to speak aloud. My phone rang again, Michael's number lighting up the screen. I decided to answer this time. Mom, thank God you picked up. We have been trying to reach you for 3 days straight. What is happening with my apartment? Why is it being sold? His voice carried that particular combination of panic and indignation that I remembered from his teenage years when consequences caught up with poor choices he had made. But he was not 16 anymore, and this was not about breaking curfew or failing to complete homework assignments. Michael, I told you we would discuss this situation when you returned from Hawaii. How is your romantic vacation going? How is the vacation going, Mom? My apartment is being sold while I am supposed to be relaxing on the beach. Sarah has not stopped worrying since we found out. She is making herself sick over this situation. I am sorry Sarah is upset, I said, and genuinely meant it. But you both made your feelings about my presence very clear in that text message. I am simply responding to those feelings in an appropriate manner. What feelings, Mom? You are being completely dramatic about this whole thing. Sarah just thought the vacation would be more romantic and meaningful with just the 2 of us. It was not personal at all. I closed my eyes, remembering the exact words of his dismissive message. Michael, you told me to cancel my trip because Sarah thinks 3 people would ruin your romantic getaway. You excluded me from a family vacation with less ceremony than you would cancel a dentist appointment. How exactly was that not personal? The silence that followed was heavy with realization. Then Sarah's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. I could not make out her exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. Blame, anger, desperation mixing into a cocktail of panic. Mom, just do not sell the apartment. Please. We will pay you rent if that is what you want. We will figure out some other arrangement that works for everyone involved. The apartment sold this morning, Michael. Closing happens next Tuesday. The silence that followed was so complete, I wondered if our connection had been lost. When Michael spoke again, his voice sounded smaller, younger than his 26 years. Where are we supposed to live now? I do not know, son, but I suspect you will figure something out. You are both very resourceful adults who clearly know how to make decisions that prioritize your own comfort above other considerations. After ending the call, I made myself lunch and continued packing methodically. Tomorrow evening, Michael and Sarah would land at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport and drive home to an apartment that was no longer theirs. They would use their key in a lock that had already been changed, ring a doorbell that would be answered by the new owners who had paid cash for their dream home. I would be 3 states away by then, staying at a small bed and breakfast in Colorado while my paperwork processed for an extended international visa. David and I had talked about Colorado in summer, the wildflowers and mountain air. I would go there first, let the altitude and scenery clear my mind before crossing the ocean to explore continents we had only dreamed about together. By the time Michael figured out how to reach me again, I would be ready to listen, but not to apologize or compromise my newfound independence. Those days of endless accommodation were over permanently. The bed and breakfast in Colorado exceeded every expectation I had dared to form. Mountain View Lodge sat on 80 acres of wilderness with guest rooms that felt like scenes from a nature documentary. I had booked the Wildflower Suite with its stone fireplace and windows overlooking a meadow where deer gathered each morning and evening. It had been 4 days since Michael and Sarah returned to find strangers living in their former apartment. 4 days since I had driven north into a new chapter of my life, leaving behind 26 years of single motherhood and 3 years of being treated like an inconvenient third wheel in my own family. Jennifer, the lodge owner, was a woman about my age who had left corporate marketing to chase a dream of mountain hospitality. We had bonded over morning coffee and her homemade blueberry muffins, sharing stories of late-life reinvention and the courage it takes to start completely over. "Any regrets?" she asked that morning as we watched the deer through her kitchen window. About the apartment, none whatsoever. About taking so long to stand up for myself every single day. My phone had been silent since Tuesday evening. Either Michael was too shocked to call, or Sarah had convinced him that his mother had completely lost her mind. Both possibilities seemed equally likely given the circumstances. But I was not the same woman who had received that cruel text message 10 days ago. That woman had been living small, grateful for whatever scraps of affection her son felt like throwing her way. This woman was sitting in a charming lodge in Colorado, planning international adventures that would have made David incredibly proud of her courage and independence. My attorney had called yesterday with final financial numbers. After returning Michael and Sarah's payments and covering all legal fees, I had cleared enough from the apartment sale to fund 3 years of comfortable international travel. Combined with my nursing pension and David's life insurance benefits, I could afford to discover who Eleanor Martinez might become when she stopped defining herself through other people's expectations and needs. "There is something I want to show you," Jennifer said, leading me to her office after breakfast. She pulled out a photo album filled with pictures of guests who had stayed at Mountain View Lodge over the past 7 years. Every single person in these photos was running from something or toward something, usually both simultaneously. I flipped through pages of smiling faces, reading the handwritten notes guests had left behind. Stories of divorce, retirement, loss, new beginnings. Women my age starting art careers. Men learning to play musical instruments. Couples rediscovering each other after children left home permanently. "Where do you think you are running?" Jennifer asked gently. I thought about Michael as a boy, climbing into my bed during thunderstorms. I thought about Sarah, polite but cold at every family gathering. I thought about David, who died believing our son would take care of me in my golden years with the same devotion I had shown him. I am not running from anything, I realized as I spoke the words aloud. I am running toward the woman I was before I became afraid of taking up too much space in my own life and dreams. That afternoon, I drove to the local library and used their computer to book my flight to Australia. Sydney Airport, New South Wales. Departure in 3 weeks. Enough time to arrange my affairs properly. Say goodbye to friends who had been wondering why I seemed so diminished and apologetic lately. The librarian, a kind woman with silver hair and laugh lines, helped me print my boarding pass and travel documents. "First time to Australia?" she asked with genuine interest. "First time anywhere internationally, really. My husband and I planned to travel after his retirement, but heart disease had other plans entirely." She nodded with understanding. My husband was the same way, always putting off adventures until someday. I learned after he passed that someday never comes unless you actively make it today. As I drove back to Mountain View Lodge, my phone finally rang with a familiar number. Michael's voice when I answered carried none of its usual confidence and entitlement. "Mom, we really need to talk about this situation." "I am listening," I said, settling into the comfortable chair by my window. The deer were returning to their evening grazing, and sunset light painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Sarah and I found a small apartment across town. Month-to-month lease until we figure out our next steps. He paused, and I could hear traffic noise in the background suggesting he was calling from his car. Mom, I know you are angry about the Hawaii thing, but selling my apartment was completely extreme. We could have worked this out like reasonable adults. Your apartment, I kept my voice gentle but absolutely firm. Michael, I need you to understand something fundamental here. That was never your apartment. It was my gift to you, contingent on treating the gift giver with respect and appreciation. I do respect you, Mom. I love you more than anything. Then why did you tell me to cancel my trip? Because Sarah thinks 3 people would ruin your romantic getaway. Why did you exclude me from a family vacation via text message like I was some casual acquaintance you were uninviting from a dinner party? Silence stretched between us across the miles. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a note of genuine confusion. Sarah said she thought you might feel like a third wheel on a romantic trip, that maybe you would be more comfortable staying home and relaxing instead. And you believed that without asking me directly how I felt about it. More silence filled with the weight of poor assumptions and thoughtless choices. In the background, Sarah's voice rose in what sounded like a heated discussion, though I could not make out specific words. Their stress was audible even through the phone connection. Mom, where are you right now? We went by your house, but Mrs. Chen said you had gone traveling somewhere. You never travel anywhere without telling me first. I am in Colorado, planning my trip to Australia. Your father always wanted to see the Great Barrier Reef before climate change destroyed it completely. Australia, Mom, you cannot just disappear to Australia by yourself. What if something happens to you? What if you need help or get into trouble? For the first time in our conversation, I found myself smiling genuinely. Michael, I am 62 years old, not 92. I was a registered nurse for 34 years. I managed our family finances, raised you completely alone, and built a life that functioned successfully. Why would you assume I cannot handle international travel independently? Because you never. He stopped mid-sentence, apparently realizing how his words sounded when spoken aloud. 'Cause I never put myself first. Because I spent 26 years making sure you had everything you needed, even when it meant I had nothing left for my own dreams and desires. The silence that followed felt different, heavier with the weight of recognition. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice thick with something that might have been genuine realization. Mom, I am truly sorry. About the text message, about the Hawaii trip, about taking the apartment for granted like it was something I deserved rather than something you generously provided. Sarah and I got comfortable thinking you would always just be there, available whenever we needed you but invisible when we wanted space. I will always be your mother, Michael. But being taken for granted and treated as an afterthought, that chapter of my life is permanently closed. After we ended our call, I sat watching the deer settle into their nighttime routine. Tomorrow I would start the drive back to Phoenix to finalize my travel arrangements and say proper goodbyes to the life I was leaving behind. In 3 weeks, I would be boarding a plane for the first solo international adventure of my entire existence. Michael had sounded genuinely contrite during our conversation, and perhaps this experience would teach him something valuable about respect and gratitude. But whether it did or not, I was completely finished shaping my life around his personal growth process and emotional needs. Eleanor Martinez was going to Australia and maybe New Zealand and possibly Thailand after that. She was going to discover what it felt like to wake up each morning with no one's needs to consider except her own authentic desires. And if her son wanted to rebuild their relationship on healthier terms, he would have to prove he understood the difference between having a mother and deserving one through consistent actions rather than desperate words. 4 months in Australia changed everything about how I saw myself and my possibilities. But it was the email waiting at my hotel in Melbourne that changed everything again in ways I could never have anticipated. Hotel staff had forwarded it from 2 previous locations, and the sender's name made my hands shake as I opened it. Michael Martinez, subject line marked urgent. Mom, I know you probably do not want to hear from me, but something has happened that you need to know about. Sarah left me last week. She said she could not handle dating someone whose mother clearly did not approve of her, and that our relationship was too complicated with family drama. But that is not the real reason she left. I scrolled down to continue reading, my coffee growing cold as Michael's words revealed a truth I had not seen coming. The real reason Sarah wanted you excluded from Hawaii was because she has been stealing money from my business accounts for months. She was afraid you would notice something was wrong with our finances if you spent 2 weeks around us. My veterinary practice has been struggling because Sarah convinced me to make her the office manager, and she has been embezzling funds to support a gambling addiction I knew nothing about. The apartment sale money you returned to us, she took all of it to Las Vegas the day after we got it back. I just found out yesterday when the bank called about overdrafts. I set down my phone and walked to the window overlooking Melbourne's beautiful harbor. For months of thinking my son had simply been thoughtless and selfish, when the reality was much more complicated. He had been manipulated by someone I had welcomed into our family with open arms and genuine affection. My phone buzzed with a follow-up message. Mom, I know I handled everything wrong from the beginning. I should have asked you directly about Hawaii instead of just sending that terrible text. I should have questioned Sarah's reasoning instead of going along with what she wanted. But I was already starting to suspect something was wrong with our money, and I was scared to look too closely at the situation. I am not asking you to come home or change your travel plans. I know I broke your trust and hurt you deeply. I just wanted you to know that I am finally seeing clearly now, and I understand why you did what you did. You were protecting yourself from people who did not value you properly. I just wish I had been smarter about recognizing what was happening before it got to this point. That evening I sat in a Melbourne cafe, watching people rush past on their way to dinner plans and evening entertainment. Everything I had thought about the past few months suddenly looked different. Michael had not been casually cruel. He had been caught between loyalty to me and manipulation by someone who was actively deceiving both of us. But that did not change the fundamental lesson he needed to learn about respect and consideration. If anything, it made that lesson more important. He had allowed another person to convince him that his mother's feelings were less important than avoiding temporary discomfort. I typed my response carefully. Michael, I am sorry to hear about Sarah's deception and the damage it has caused to your business and your trust. Being manipulated by someone you love is painful, and I genuinely sympathize with what you are going through right now. However, the way you handled the Hawaii situation was still wrong, regardless of Sarah's motives. You chose to exclude me via text message without explanation or discussion. That choice came from your own values and priorities, not from her influence. If we are going to rebuild our relationship, you need to understand that difference clearly. I am not ready to come home yet. I am learning things about myself that I should have discovered years ago. But I am willing to stay in regular contact through email while you work on rebuilding your life and figuring out who you want to be when you are not being influenced by other people's agendas. Michael's response came within hours. Mom, you are absolutely right. I made my own choice to take the easy path instead of having difficult conversations. Sarah's deception does not excuse my behavior toward you. I want to be the kind of man who would never exclude his mother from anything without a real conversation first. Would you be willing to email me about your travels? I would love to know what you are discovering about the world and about yourself. I promise not to ask you to cut your trip short or change your plans for my convenience. I just miss knowing that you are okay and maybe learning from the adventures you are having. And so began a correspondence that slowly rebuilt our relationship on entirely new foundations. Michael wrote about closing his veterinary practice temporarily to deal with the financial mess Sarah had created. About therapy sessions where he was learning to recognize manipulation and stand up for his own values. About the loneliness of realizing he had almost lost the most important person in his life because he was too afraid to disappoint someone who was actively betraying him. I wrote about sunrise over the Great Barrier Reef, about learning to scuba dive at 62, about the confidence that comes from navigating foreign countries independently, about making friends with other solo travelers who had also discovered freedom later in life than they had expected. Months passed with regular emails crossing the Pacific Ocean. Michael's messages grew more thoughtful, more introspective, as he worked through the therapy process and rebuilt his veterinary practice with careful attention to financial controls. My messages grew more adventurous as I explored New Zealand's mountains and Thailand's beaches, discovering that the world was full of kind people eager to help a curious traveler. When I finally decided to return home after 18 months abroad, it was not because Michael asked me to or because I was lonely. It was because I had become the woman I wanted to be, and I was ready to see if my son had become the man he claimed he wanted to be. The relationship we built after my return was nothing like our old dynamic. Michael had learned to ask directly for what he needed instead of hoping I would guess. He had learned to consider my feelings before making plans that affected me. He had learned the difference between having a mother and deserving one through consistent, respectful behavior rather than assumptions about unconditional availability. I had learned that love does not require endless sacrifice and accommodation. That setting boundaries is an act of love toward both yourself and the people who need to learn how to treat you properly. That sometimes the best gift you can give someone is refusing to rescue them from consequences they need to face. The Michael who picked me up at the airport after 18 months looked different. Not just physically, though he had lost weight and seemed more serious. He looked like a man who had learned difficult lessons about responsibility and respect. He hugged me carefully, as if he was no longer certain he deserved my affection but was grateful for whatever I was willing to offer. Mom, welcome home. I know home might not feel the same after everything that happened, but I want you to know that I spent every day you were gone thinking about the kind of son I should have been and the kind of man I want to become. During the drive to my house, Michael told me about the changes he had made. The veterinary practice was thriving again under careful financial management. He had completed a year of therapy and was continuing with monthly sessions to maintain his progress. He had started volunteering at the animal shelter where he first fell in love with veterinary medicine as a teenager. Most importantly, he had learned to be alone without immediately seeking another relationship to fill the void. I realized I had never really known who I was when I was not trying to please someone else. Sarah, you other girlfriends over the years. I was always adapting myself to what I thought they wanted instead of developing my own authentic personality. My house felt smaller when I walked through the front door, but also more truly mine than it had ever felt before. 18 months of international adventure had changed my perspective on what I needed to feel comfortable and fulfilled. The space was still beautiful, but it no longer felt like the entire world. Michael helped me carry my suitcases upstairs, then hesitated at the top of the stairs. Mom, I know you probably need time to settle back in, but would you be willing to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Nothing fancy, just a chance to talk about everything that happened and where we go from here. I would like that very much, I said, and meant it completely. But Michael, I need you to understand that I am not the same woman who left here 18 months ago. I discovered parts of myself that had been buried under decades of putting other people first. Any relationship we build going forward has to honor that growth. He nodded seriously. I would not want you to go backward, Mom. The woman who sold my apartment and flew to Australia by herself is someone I respect more than the woman who would have quietly accepted being excluded and made excuses for my behavior. I want to know that stronger version of my mother. That evening, I unpacked my souvenirs and photographs, spreading them across my kitchen table like evidence of transformation. Pictures of myself scuba diving in the Great Barrier Reef, hiking through New Zealand forests, learning to cook Thai cuisine in a Bangkok market. In every photo, I looked confident and genuinely happy in ways I had not seen in my own face for years. The next evening, Michael arrived at my door carrying flowers and a bottle of wine, but also something else. A thick folder filled with documents and photographs. Mom, before we have dinner, I want to show you everything I learned about what Sarah was doing and why she really wanted you excluded from Hawaii. We sat at my kitchen table as Michael spread out bank statements, credit card bills, and printed emails that told the story of systematic financial manipulation. Sarah had been embezzling money from his veterinary practice for over a year, using her position as office manager to cover her tracks. The gambling addiction had started small but escalated quickly as she chased bigger wins to pay for previous losses. The Hawaii trip exclusion had not been about romance or my presence being inconvenient. Sarah had been terrified that spending 2 weeks around me would expose her deception. She knew I had been a nurse for decades, trained to notice details and ask questions when things did not add up properly. She was afraid you would notice that our finances did not match our lifestyle, Michael explained. The apartment I was supposedly paying for, the expensive restaurants we went to, the designer clothes she bought constantly. If you had spent real time with us, you would have realized the numbers did not work with my veterinary income. I studied the evidence he had compiled with the same attention to detail I had once brought to medical charts. The pattern was clear and devastating. Sarah had been living a double life, funded by money stolen from the practice Michael had worked years to establish. How much did she take total? I asked quietly. Nearly $40,000 over 14 months. Plus the apartment money you returned to us after the sale, which disappeared into casino accounts within a week. I almost lost the entire practice because of cash flow problems I could not understand. We ate dinner while Michael told me about the process of rebuilding his business and his self-respect. The shame of realizing he had been completely deceived by someone he trusted. The difficulty of accepting that his cruel text message to me had been the result of manipulation but was still his responsibility to own and correct. Mom, I keep thinking about how differently everything would have gone if I had just talked to you directly about Sarah's concerns instead of sending that dismissive text. If I had been brave enough to have an honest conversation instead of taking what seemed like the easy path. What would you have said if I had asked you directly whether you were comfortable with the Hawaii arrangement? I asked, genuinely curious about this alternate timeline we would never experience. He considered this carefully. I think I would have told you that Sarah seemed anxious about money lately and was worried about the expense of paying for 3 people. And you would have immediately asked questions that would have led to discovering her deception months earlier. Exactly. And we could have dealt with the real problem instead of creating unnecessary hurt feelings and damaged relationships. But Michael, the most important thing is that you have learned to recognize the difference between avoiding conflict and solving problems. After dinner, we walked through my garden where the flowers I had planted in David's memory were blooming magnificently after 18 months of care from Mrs. Chen. Michael admired the growth and changes, then turned to face me with an expression of serious determination. Mom, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever your answer is, I will respect it completely. Would you be willing to let me take you on a trip somewhere? Not as an apology for Hawaii, but as a celebration of who you have become and who we might be as adults with a healthy relationship. Where would you want to go? I asked, touched by the thoughtfulness of his offer, but also curious about whether he had learned to consider my interests alongside his own. Wherever you want to go most in the world. You have been to Australia and New Zealand and Thailand. Where is the next place on your list? I want to experience it with you, not as your dependent child, but as your adult son who finally understands how to be grateful for your presence in his life. I smiled, thinking about the travel brochures I had collected during my months abroad, but had not yet had time to explore. There is a small island in Greece called Santorini that David and I always talked about visiting. The sunsets are supposed to be the most beautiful in the world, and there are archaeological sites that date back thousands of years. Then we go to Santorini, Michael said without hesitation. When do you want to leave and how long do you want to stay? This is your trip, Mom. I am just grateful to be invited along. 6 months later, we stood together on a cliff overlooking the Aegean Sea, watching the sun set over water so blue it looked like liquid sapphire. Michael had planned every detail of our 2-week trip with careful attention to my interests and comfort level. He had researched the history of every site we visited, learned basic Greek phrases to help us navigate, and made sure we had time for both adventure and relaxation. This is exactly what Dad and I dreamed about, I told him as we watched the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. He would have loved sharing this moment with both of us. Michael was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with a maturity I had not heard in his voice before. Mom, I spent so many years thinking I knew what you needed and wanted without ever really asking. I assumed you were happy just taking care of me and that your own dreams were not important anymore. Now I understand that the most loving thing I can do is pay attention to who you actually are instead of who I needed you to be. You raised an amazing son, but you are also an amazing woman with your own desires and adventures to pursue. As we flew home from Greece, I reflected on the journey we had both taken to reach this point of mutual respect and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. The woman who had received that cruel text message 2 years earlier would never have imagined this outcome was possible. That woman had been living small, accepting whatever scraps of consideration her son felt like offering. This woman had traveled the world independently, discovered her own strength and resilience, and built a relationship with her adult child based on mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. Michael had learned that love expresses itself through thoughtful attention and respectful behavior, not through assumptions about unconditional availability. I had learned that setting boundaries and maintaining my own identity actually made me a better mother, not a selfish one. The text message that had seemed like the end of our relationship had actually been the beginning of something much healthier and more sustainable. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be exactly what you needed to discover who you were meant to become. As our plane touched down in Phoenix, Michael turned to me with a smile that reminded me of the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, but also showed me the confident man he had grown into. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me even when I did not deserve your patience. Thank you for teaching me that real love requires effort and consideration, not just expectation and assumption. And thank you for showing me that it is never too late to become the person you were meant to be." The woman who had once defined herself entirely through her role as Michael's mother smiled back at her son, knowing that she had finally learned to be proud of both who she had raised and who she had chosen to become. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is refusing to be smaller than you actually are, even when it means risking everything you thought you needed to keep them in your life. Thanks for listening to my story today. Remember to subscribe to this channel and share your own experiences in the comments below. Your voice and your story matter more than you might realize.